All right, we're going to have a look at climate graphs. Well, sort of. We're going to have a look at some climate data, and we can imagine what it might look like as a graph. So there are two main things that we tend to look for in climate data or climate graphs, and that is we're looking at the temperature for every month of the year. We will look at the average temperature and the average precipitation, and another word for that is just rainfall. So we've got for Birmingham the rainfall and temperature for each month of the year. Something to point out is the unit of measurements, so I'll just write them on here. Rainfall we measure in millimetres and temperature is in degrees Celsius. So we might be asked a number of different types of questions, but we're just going to go through the basic ones you might see in a typical exam. When we look at temperature on a line graph, climate graph, we often see it drawn as a line graph using the temperature scale. Here we're just dealing with a data set, but you need to be aware that when you see it on a climate graph, it's the line graph that we're looking at. The main calculation that you're going to be asked to look at is the temperature range. And the range means the same as a data set you might see in maths. It's saying the highest minus the lowest. In this case, because we're looking at temperature data, it's the highest temperature minus the lowest temperature. And what does that equal? What's the result? So for example, if I had the temperature as lowest temperature is 15 and the highest temperature is 20, the range wouldn't be 15 to 20. The range would be the result of that. So 20, or the difference between those numbers. The difference being, in this case, 5 degrees Celsius. So the typical temperature type question you get asked is what's the temperature range? Highest minus lowest equals. When we look at rainfall or precipitation, we'll see that on a climate graph as a column graph using the precipitation scale. And we often get asked the same thing one of two ways. What's the total rainfall? And again, total means the same thing as it does in maths when we're looking at a data set. It just means add them all together. So if I'm totaling the rainfall, I'm adding all the rainfall values together. You might be asked this one, which sounds a little bit trickier, the average annual rainfall or the average annual precipitation. When you see this wording, just keep in mind it's asking you to do the exact same thing as totaling. I know it uses this word average in here, but all we want to keep in our minds is that we're looking for the annual, yearly rainfall. When it uses this word average, just to go back over here, when I see for Birmingham the rainfall in January is 75 millimetres, that's the average for January, 55 is the average for February, 50 is the average for March. So that means these are the monthly averages. So to find the yearly average, all I do is add the monthly averages together. So this is what you do anytime you're asked to calculate anything to do with the rainfall. So let's have a look at a couple of practice exam style questions. Question 1, calculate the temperature range. So remember the formula is highest minus lowest equals. So I want to know what's the result here. So let's look for the highest temperature. So if I look along, it appears to be that the highest temperature all year is 18 degrees. I want to minus from that the lowest temperature. 3 is pretty low, and it looks like 3 is the lowest temperature. So the formula I'm using is 18 minus 3, and my answer is going to be the difference between those two, 15 degrees Celsius. Remember, if you don't include the unit of measurement, you may not pick up the marks. The second question, what hemisphere is this climate graph located in? So generally speaking, we want to look at if it's in a northern or southern hemisphere, north or south of the equator. To find this out, if we didn't know where Birmingham was or what country it was, because there might be a couple of places in the world called Birmingham, what I would look at is the temperature data. And this is easy to see in a climate graph, but the general rule is if there's lower temperatures at the beginning of the year and it gets higher in temperature midway through and then lower again at the end of the year, That bump up indicates we're in the northern hemisphere. If we're in the southern hemisphere, the temperature data, if we drew it as a line graph, would start high, it would dip down low for winter, and then rise back up again for summer. So that bump down is the southern hemisphere. So if I, without graphing it officially, look at this data, it starts low, gets higher, and gets lower again. Which of these two does that look like? It looks to me like the northern hemisphere. So we've got data which is low, gets higher, and gets lower again. That bump up says to me northern hemisphere. And that's what I'm going to put as my answer. The last one is multiple choice. What is the average annual precipitation? So let's just decode this. Another word for precipitation is rainfall. Rainfall. Another word for annual is yearly. And in this case, average has a particular meaning, but because I'm talking about rainfall, I'm just going to leave that to the side. I might even just ignore it for the moment because it might confuse me. So I want to know the data about the yearly rainfall. And all I've got to do is figure out which of these is the best option to describe it. So to calculate the yearly rainfall, I'm going to look at the monthly amounts and add them together. So I don't know if you'll be able to see my calculator, but I'm going to do it. 75 plus 55 plus 50 plus another 55 plus 65 plus 50 again plus 70 plus 70 plus 60 plus 85 plus another 65. By adding them together, I've not come up with one of the answers. Now that's probably because I may have put in a number wrong, or the person who wrote these questions, which was probably me, added them up wrong. But the great thing is I'm really close to one of these answers. There's a couple that I would knock out straight away. 260 millimeters, even before I added them up, I probably would have crossed that out because it seems too low. I'm nowhere really near 1,000, so I'm going to cross out D. And it's highly likely that I've either miscalculated one of these and forgot to add a number in. So I might be under here or slightly over there. So my answer is closest to C. So that's what I'm going to pick as my answer. That's it.